Welcome to the Forum for New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District, presented by the Granite State News Collaborative and hosted by NHPR. I'm Mara Hoplamazian, a reporter for NHPR, joined today by Michaela Towfighi of the Concord Monitor. These forums are presented in partnership with New Hampshire PBS and produced with support from journalists all across the state, including at the Concord Monitor, the Laconia Daily Sun, and the Manchester Inklink. This forum is also streaming live at NHPR's YouTube channel. And today we're joined by Maggie Goodlander, a Democrat, and Lily Tang-Williams, the Republican in the race. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
As you can hear, we've got a live studio audience at NHPR. I'll just give you a bit about our format. Each candidate will have 60 seconds for an opening statement, and then we'll move to questions. Each of you will have 60 seconds to respond to the questions. Michaela and I will at times follow up with a question or seek clarification. You'll have 30 seconds on those. In the case of a direct attack, we'll give candidates 30 seconds to respond. We ask our audience to remain silent, and we ask the candidates to respect each other and please wait for your turn to speak. For today's questions, we relied on the public's feedback, and we thank everyone who supplied input. And we'll get started with opening statements. We flipped a coin backstage, and Ms. Tang-Williams, you're going first. 60 seconds, please.
Well, thank you for hosting this debate. This is only one of the two debates I will have with my opponent. Too bad she won't engage me on college campuses, which is 3 colleges, invite us to debate, engage our youth voters in this most democratic process. I am a communism survivor, and I'm super happy to be here, have the opportunity to represent the people of my district. Our contrast is very clear. I came here with nothing 36 years ago, and with a big heart and hard work to achieve my American dream. And I have lived my American dream, but I'm running today to save that dream and keep that dream alive for my children and all you future children and grandchildren. And the border crisis is a joke, and the high inflation is hurting people. American dream is not affordable right now. So people have a very, very sharp choice today. Who do you trust to represent you, D.C.? Is a D.C. insider who moved here a few months ago and worked for Biden administration, whose high inflation border crisis have decimated the American dream, and he's a security advisor, Jake Sullivan's wife, who caused the world
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams. We're going to move on to our next question. We're running out of time here, and we'll move on. Thank you. Ms. Goodlander, your opening statement, please, 60 seconds.
Well, thanks so much to NHPR and to the Granite State News Collaborative for bringing us all together this morning, 8 days before the most important election in our lifetimes. I was born on Election Day in Nashua, actually. My mom, Betty, was serving in the New Hampshire State House at the time. She went into labor. She went directly to the polling place at Broad Street Elementary School to vote before she went to St. Joe's Hospital, where I was born. And that is the spirit in which I was raised. My dad, Ted, served in the Navy, and I was really proud to follow in his footsteps. I served 11 years as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve. And one of the things I learned throughout my lifetime of service is that when you take the oath to serve our state and our country, you don't take that oath as a Democrat or a Republican, you take it as an American. And that's the spirit that I've brought to everything I've done in my life, whether it was at the Justice Department, where I was taking on corporate monopolies that are jacking up costs for hardworking people in this state, at the White House, where I led the president's unity agenda to tackle our opioid epidemic and help end cancer as we know it, or working with Senator John McCain, who I worked together with him to take on Vladimir Putin. I'm banned from Russia for life, but I will tell you something, I'll take Concord over Moscow any day of the week. So I'm really grateful to be here today.
Thank you. We're going to get started with some questions about the economy. Thanks for those opening statements. Ms. Tang-Williams, we'll start with you. You've expressed support for stringent tariffs on Chinese imports. What specific policies would you support when it comes to international trade, and would you support expanding tariffs to products from other countries? 60 seconds.
Actually, I am a libertarian Republican. I support free trade as my general principle. But when it comes to communist China, the native country I was born and grew up in, when it comes to our national security, it is justified to post tariffs on China products. And they are take advantage of our open society, infiltrate into our country, and the state enterprises from China by forming joint adventure relationship with U.S. companies. They are even qualified under Biden economics to get our tax credit from the new green deals. And that's totally wrong because we are empower them, and they are our largest adversary. So that's a different story. But generally speaking, I support free trade, and the tariffs will hurt consumers. But when it comes to China, that's just a separate issue. As I said, it's justified because of national security.
Okay, thanks so much for that response. I'll just follow up by asking you, you've said you support the freezing of all federal hiring if you're elected to Congress as a way to reduce the deficit. You've also said you'd consider cuts to the Department of Education. What other federal programs would you cut specifically, and how would that reduce the deficit?
We are a country of $35 trillion in debt, and the service of that debt, just interest alone, is past $1 trillion. And that take away all our options. And that's actually your future is at stake here as young people. And I want to freeze the hirings, reevaluate our options, and how much we should actually cut, right? Rand Paul has a plan, 6 penny plan. If you actually just cut 6 penny out of $1 budget, it actually will get us balanced budget within 5 to 6 years. And when our family got broke, we had to cut 20% expenses. So 6 penny plan, if we put politics aside and bring everybody to the table, I hope we can get that done for good interest of our people and our country.
Thanks for that response. Ms. Goodlander, we'll move on to you. You've described a, quote, fair deal for Americans as a shorthand for your economic vision. In a nutshell, what would that entail, and how would it show up in people's daily lives? 60 seconds.
Well, let me start. There are a number of ways in which it shows up in people's lives. I mentioned at the outset that I spent 3 years at the Department of Justice, including working at the Antitrust Division, where I was taking on corporate monopolies that are jacking up costs all across the board, whether it's the cost of housing, and I've talked to so many voters across this district for whom the American dream is just simply out of reach. The American dream of having a home is out of reach because the cost of housing is just too high. We could spend a whole hour on this topic alone, but what I'd say is I'm going to bring a basic sensibility that says we need fairness when it comes to a level playing field for businesses in this country, and fairness when it comes to taxation. And I think this is a real difference between me and my opponent. My opponent has embraced Donald Trump's tax cuts. And tax cuts are a really deceptive term because what we saw were $2 trillion in cuts for the biggest corporations in this country and for the most wealthy people in this country. I believe that working families in this state deserve a tax cut. That's who should be benefiting from a tax cut. That's going to help us get our deficit and debt under control, and it's going to create a level playing field. Tax fairness is a question of fundamental fairness.
Got it. And given some of the new spending that you've called for in the past, do you see any place in the federal budget in need of spending cuts, and which programs would you cut?
Well, let me just say that, first of all, I think when we have a fair system of taxation, one of the biggest questions for this next Congress is going to be whether to extend Donald Trump's tax policies for another year. And that's going to be a huge piece of business and how we're going to get our spending and our debt and deficit under control. But what I'd say, I know from my time in the United States Navy Reserve that there's a lot of room for improvement in how we think about our defense spending. I believe deeply that sunlight is the most powerful force in government. It's one of the most powerful disinfectants, and we should be taking a close look so that we're not in a situation where hundreds of millions of dollars can sometimes be a rounding error in our budget. So I'm going to bring those New Hampshire values to our budget process every step of the way.
Thanks for that response. We'll move on to immigration. Michaela, you have the next question.
Ms. Goodlander, you've previously worked for Senator John McCain on the bipartisan Gang of Eight immigration reform bill. How does the contemporary system fall short, and what specific policies would you support in reforming it? 60 seconds.
That was an important effort 11 years ago, and we've been in desperate need of Congress stepping up to the plate and actually updating our vastly outdated immigration laws and properly funding our chronically underfunded system. So that bill, no one thought it could pass through the United States Senate. It did, and it's become a framework for the future. And what we have now is another bipartisan bill that both President Biden and Vice President Harris have said they would like to sign into law. It's a bill that's going to properly fund our immigration courts. We've got 92 immigration courts around this country that have been chronically underfunded. I saw that firsthand working at the Department of Justice. It will fund our Border Patrol agents who are doing really hard work with not enough resources, and that's why the Border Patrol has endorsed this bill. It's going to help us update a vastly outdated system, this bipartisan bill. My opponent has opposed this bill. I believe that Congress should be focused on actually solving the crisis at the border, not sowing chaos. And that is exactly the spirit that I want to bring to this work.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that long ago that the Gang of Eight was heralded as a model for bipartisan policymaking. But it failed. So what's different now in Congress to make reform more likely?
Well, what I'd say is one of the things I learned from that experience was that sometimes comprehensive can be the enemy of progress. And I believe deeply that we've got a wide range of comprehensive reforms that we've got to work on. But I also believe in something that Senator Ted Kennedy said. He too worked to update our immigration laws during his long tenure in the United States Senate. And his rule of thumb was you've always got to find the 30%. You might disagree with someone on 70%, but you've got to find the 30% and get it done. Today, 30% is a big piece of the pie, but what I can tell you is I will always look for the 30%, or if it's 3% or 0.3%, I'll find that common ground and get the job done.
We'll have to move on now. Ms. Tang-Williams, you said when sponsoring your brother's path to immigration, it took 13 years. Do you believe that comprehensive immigration reform is needed in the U.S.? And if so, what specific legislation would you support to that effect? 60 seconds.
Well, I'm a legal immigrant. I have a credibility to speak on this issue that my brother did wait 13 years in China by having me as American sponsor, which is for the first 5 years, his family will not be on the back of taxpayers, no public burdens. But Maggie is a part of a failed Biden administration open border policies. How many billions of dollars we spend on illegal immigration, and what did Biden do after he became a president? And any kind of immigration reforms, I'm for, but on the condition we must secure our border first and stop federal government offering incentives on the backs of taxpayers to get the people come here illegally. And it is a slap in the face to all the legal immigrants waiting in line with American sponsorship, about 5 million of them. And you should tell people what is taxpayers' money spent on illegal immigration, how many of them come in from how many, not friendly countries, and where are they? And you should give us the numbers since you are part of the failed Biden open border policies.
Follow-up to that. In your campaign platform, you noted support for granting citizenship to DACA recipients without criminal records. Is that still your position? And how would you convince members of your party to agree to such a proposal?
The DACA was a different case, and now we're talking about over 10 million coming under Biden since he reversed all the border policies on day one. And that's all I said is that I'm a legal immigrant. I wanted to send a message to the world. If you want to come here, work hard, and come the right way, we welcome you, and you can achieve American dream. This is the greatest country on earth. But if you don't follow the laws, and you go through that dangerous channel, tunnel, like the route is coming here, it's because Biden sent the wrong message to the people in the world.
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams. We have a lot to cover today, so let's keep moving. We're going to go back tomorrow.
We're going to turn to the environment and energy policy right now. Ms. Tang-Williams, communities in your district have been hit hard by extreme storms that have destroyed roads and homes. The scientific consensus is clear that human activity is warming the planet and fueling more extreme weather. In the past, you've cast doubt on climate science. Do you accept the consensus on climate change, and what policies would you support to address the impacts on residents of your district?
I have to say that, climate change is real, and our country, our people are most environmentally conscious people. There are lots of people at the grassroots level volunteer to work on environmental causes. I respect that. But I don't want the top-down mandates because that will cost our economy, our jobs, and our people are paying for high inflation. And those kind of mandates, Green New Deals, like by what year we must have electrical vehicles and get rid of our gas stoves, those are top-down mandates will hurt people. What is the percentage of New Hampshire people have an EV car right now? Maybe less than 1%. And we want to embrace those central government mandate and tell you by what years you got to get rid of your gas cars. And I just cannot support that because we want to have choices. New Hampshire people are very independent-minded. I'm sure you will make best informed decisions when it comes to your daily life, when it comes to your business, and when it comes to environment.
Got it. And to follow up on that, home insurance costs have been growing in recent years as weather-related disasters increase. In New Hampshire, where flooding is one of the biggest threats to homes, most property owners are not insured for flood damage. How would you address these twin problems, the increasing vulnerability of homes and the rising insurance premiums? 30 seconds.
Well, it's funny that the people always blame corporations on lots of things, never blame on government who cause lots of problems. For example, high inflation caused by who? Only Washington, D.C. government can print money, devalue our dollars, and make you pay for higher cost of food and energy and insurance. You know, when the inflation goes up, everything goes up. They are related. It's not isolated incident. But the blame on corporations causes problem. It's really a lack of fundamental economics 101.
Just to quickly, clarify, how would you address both the vulnerability of homes due to, rising risks from climate change and insurance premiums that are becoming unaffordable for some people?
Well, you're assuming that the insurance costs relate to the climate change, but I want to say we address that as a market competition. We need to open up. And the insurance industry is very, very highly regulated. If we increase competition and people have the choice to pick the best plan to fit their needs, hopefully we'll bring down the cost of homeowner insurance. But that also goes with, of course, natural disasters. And we see that happen in Ohio, in North Carolina, and our Hawaii. Our federal government actually failed to provide timely relief to those victims.
Thanks for your response. Ms. Goodlander, we'll turn to you. Scientists say transitioning off of fossil fuels is essential to mitigating climate change. Renewable energy generation has been increasing in the U.S., but fossil fuel production reached record highs during the Biden administration. You say you want to make New Hampshire the center of a clean energy movement. What policies would you support to enable that shift? 60 seconds.
Thank you. Well, let me just first say it is simply not enough in 2024 to acknowledge that climate change is real, and this is a real difference between the two of us. I see it everywhere I've gone around this district, the impacts. This is not a crisis that is explained in a textbook. This has had real human impacts all across New Hampshire. The Department of Defense has been saying for years that this is a threat to our national security. So this is, if you're a climate voter, then I hope you'll take a hard look at both of our policies and approaches, because we couldn't be more different when it comes to solutions. So what I'd say about this is, New Hampshire, we're behind when it comes to investing in clean energy technology. We're behind when it comes to the transition, and I think my hope is that the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most significant piece of climate legislation passed by any country on earth ever, will be a first step towards a clean energy future. What that's going to do, and I know I'm running out of time, but what that's going to do is it's going to reduce energy costs. We've got some of the highest energy costs in New Hampshire in the country. It's going to create jobs. And I saw this firsthand when I was in Groveton just a few days ago at Q Hydrogen, a company that is transforming a paper mill into a clean energy future. And it's going to help us address an existential crisis of our time, the climate crisis.
Thanks for your response. I want to dig down more on energy costs. What do you say to people who are concerned about the cost of developing more renewable energy like solar and wind, and how that might affect their energy bills?
Well, look, we've got to responsibly transition, and that is absolutely essential. But I think what we see with clean energy technologies, when we do invest in them, they do lead to lower energy costs. And we've got some of the highest costs in the country right now. It's something I hear about every single day. And so we've got to be ready to make this transition. It's like I said, it's a win-win-win situation where when it comes to costs, to the creation of jobs. This paper mill I mentioned in Groveton was the center of public life in Groveton. And when it shut down in 2007, 300 people lost their jobs. We have an opportunity to create good jobs in that same very spot and help us address an existential crisis of our time.
Thanks for your response. Over to you, Michaela.
Ms. Tang-Williams, you've said that decisions on abortion should be left in the hands of states and that more support is needed for American families. During the pandemic, the expanded child tax credit was one such measure and helped lower child poverty rates. Do you think Congress should reinstate this benefit?
Abortion and credit for a child, and it is a state issue. I absolutely support that belongs to the state, and And my opponent lied about me, say I want to ban abortion at the federal level. It's not true. It's on my website. I have said over and over again. And actually, I am very sympathetic towards actually the struggling families. As I said, inflation is caused by government. And their top-down government policies, mandates will only hurt us more and not less. And if people want to really afford to buy and to afford to rent, and we should bring down inflation. And cannot blame corporations, and that's lack of economics 101. And we are a country of $35 trillion debt. How are we going to continue to use fake printed money to offer free stuff to our citizens? I don't know. So our priorities should be, of course, our American citizens, our people in our district, and we are open to look at all options. But the thing is so that inflation is high. That's the root of problem that everything else goes up.
A follow to that. So many Republicans say that their opposition to abortion should be accompanied by pro-family policies. What does that look like to you, and does it include the expanded child tax credit? 30 seconds.
Well, that I actually always promote culture of life. I feel sympathetic to a woman who are going through crisis, but if they had adequate help, like financial help and free services, there are lots of crisis pregnancy centers help you to do that. And it's not just government is a solution, but our families and children with lots of single parents household, they do need help. And they're saying so that at the grassroots level, we need to help them to make a very informed decisions. Yeah. And at the federal level, those are open to discussion.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Goodlander, you've said on the campaign trail that extreme politicians and judges have ripped away basic rights regarding reproductive freedoms. You've talked in general about your ability to find agreement where you can, but abortion is an issue that often feels elusive. Where does the middle ground on federal abortion policy look like to you?
You know, my view is the view that is shared by the vast majority of Americans and Granite Staters, which is that when it comes to choices about health care, there is no place for a politician in between a woman and her health care provider. My opponent has fully embraced the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade. What does that mean? That means that she has judged it the right thing to do to put that power in the hands of politicians at the state level. I know from my own professional experience that when we try to do that, lines are hard to draw and people lose their lives. I know from my own personal experience that we are living every single day with the consequences of the Supreme Court's decision ripping away a fundamental constitutional right. This is become in this country a matter of life or death for so many Americans. And I hope that we will all remember the name Amber Thurman. She was a woman in Georgia who, like me, was 20 weeks pregnant and needed access to health care. She was denied that care because her doctor was afraid of being prosecuted and said she wasn't close enough to death. She was sent home and she died. This is not the country we should be living in, and I believe that the fight to restore reproductive freedom in this country begins in the United States House of Representatives.
So you don't trust people to decide in our Granite State? You know, that's most democratic way to decide.
Ms. Tang-Williams, I have a follow-up for Ms. Goodlander. Abortion rights aside, what other policies would you favor to support families in the United States?
Well, let me just respond to this question. I trust women to make their own health care decisions. And I do not believe that politicians have any place in between women and their health care providers. I just don't. And this is a very big difference between the two of us.
But the Congress decides that is a politician. They're not politicians in D.C.
We have a lot to cover today, and so we're going to need you to respond when we ask you questions. So back to the follow-up. What other policies do you favor to support families?
So look, I think as someone who really wants to become a parent in this country, my husband Jake and I want to raise our kids right here in New Hampshire. It's never been a harder time to navigate the questions of if, when, and how to become a parent. So I believe it is, in the first instance, we've got to protect the basic right to access abortion services, to access contraception, to access IVF. These are basic health care rights that should be protected by Congress. You mentioned the child tax credit earlier. You know, we have a crisis in affordability and accessibility of child care in this state and all across this country. I hear about it everywhere I go. Women who are having to literally choose not to go back to work because they can't afford to do so. Yeah. The child tax credit cut child poverty in half. And at a moment when almost 40% of people in the state can't
Thank you,
afford
Ms.
an
Goodlander. We're
unexpected
gonna need
expense
to
of
move on.
$400, this is a solution that will help.
Thank you. Back tomorrow.
Thanks. We're going to turn to foreign policy now. Ms. Goodlander, recent polling shows more than half of Americans believe the United States should not be sending weapons to Israel. Would you support halting weapons shipments? And if not, what do you say to the more than half of the country that believes it's the right thing to do? 60 seconds.
Look, I know from my experience in the United States Navy 2 things that guide me in how I think about this. Number one is that the bilateral relationship between the United States and Israel is one that is rooted not just in a shared history and shared values, but in shared threats to our own national security. And so that is a starting premise, that our enemies are Israel's enemies. The second point here, though, what I would say is that these kinds of decisions are ones that have been entrusted to Congress, and you've got to take a really close look at the details. You've got to take a really close look every time, and federal law has been set up in a way that allows Congress. We've created standards and conditions, and Congress writes those laws, and they are applied most often by nonpartisan public servants who make judgments about these laws, if that's what you're asking about, halting arms shipments.
So would you support that or not?
As a general matter, I believe that one of the most important investments we can make in the Middle East for our own national security is to continue to deepen the relationship between the United States and Israel. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It is one of our closest intelligence and military partners in the world. And so this is a relationship that I strongly support, particularly in the aftermath of October 7th, which was the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. And, Israel's the leading recipient of U.S. foreign aid, including military support. You've said just now that relationship is rooted in deeply held values. How do you square that with assessments that the country's longstanding occupation of Palestine violates basic human rights and tenets of democracy, and of recent UN findings of crimes against humanity and Israeli attacks on Gaza?
Well, what I should say is, look, anyone who looks at the situation right now in Gaza can be left with nothing but heartbreak, because there has been so much human suffering. And part of the role of the United States is to advance our interests and our national security, but also to advance our values and to abide by the rule of law, to uphold the rule of law. And so these are ideas that we always have to balance. And to me, the solution here includes, number one, we've got to bring about the status quo that we saw before October 7th, which was a ceasefire. We've got to bring about a ceasefire. We've got to return home the hostages who have been kept in brutal captivity for more than a year now. And we've got to surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza, because, I think of what John Donne said in a poem. He said, "Any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind." And that is true in Gaza, that anyone's death in this conflict diminishes me, and I will fight to make sure that we get the humanitarian assistance that's needed.
Thank you, Ms. Goodlander. To you now, Ms. Tang-Williams, I want to ask you the same question on the arms embargo. Would you support that? And if not, what do you make of the roughly half of Americans who think that's the right choice?
Well, the world is on fire, especially the Middle East, because of failed Biden and your husband Jake Sullivan foreign policies. And this tragedy will never happen on October 7th. And if we had a very strong, not absent leadership in White House, and also that an Abraham Accord, which is a peace deal between Israel and the Middle East, almost reached right before October 7th. There are 5 countries wanting to sign up with this deal. Then Hamas attacked. Iran is behind terrorist organizations and Hamas attack. And Iran deal was a mistake broken by Biden and Jake Sullivan regime that gave them the billions of dollars cash and also release the economic sanction on them, so Iran could sell hundreds of billions of dollars oil to China in order to get more cash to supply to the Hamas and terrorist organizations. It's unfortunate for the innocent people who are involved in this Middle East conflict. But Israel does have right to exist, have right to defend themselves, and we will try our best to bring the peace and together. But the United States does not get the chance to tell them what to do.
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams. I want to follow up on that. You've advocated for cuts to federal spending in multiple ways. The U.S. has provided about $18 billion in military aid to Israel since last year. Do you support that level of aid continuing? And if so, why is that a higher priority for federal spending than domestic programs?
You know what? Our aid to Israel is a fraction of our money sent to Ukraine, which every Democrat in Congress supported, $175 billion to Ukraine. Think how much cash that is where people are paying for printed money, high inflation. And all Democrats wave Ukrainian flag from the U.S. floor of Congress, and they did not even want other people to know that. And mainstream media do not report that. I want to have our foreign policy look at each country's separate deals instead of lump them together. Ukraine and Israel, Taiwan are totally three separate deals. We need to look at each bill separately. So all the deals, details are, in the bills that we need to talk about them and debate them. I don't want to rush through to pass any more, huge chunk of printed money into other countries.
All right. Thanks so much, Ms. Tang-Williams. We've reached just about halfway in our time here, so we'll take a short break. This is the Granite State News Collaborative and NHPR's Candidate Forum for New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District. We'll be right back.
NHPR is rooted in New Hampshire and sustained by you. By becoming a member of our leadership circle with an annual gift of $1,200, you allow us to further our mission, expanding minds, sparking connections, and building stronger communities. You also support critically important independent journalism that keeps you and your neighbors informed and connected. Become a Leadership Circle member today at nhpr.org/leaders.
Support for NHPR comes from you, our listeners, and you, our sustaining members. Thank you for your continued support of New Hampshire Public Radio. See mostly sunny skies this afternoon, highs in the 40s to lower 50s. Clear to partly cloudy tonight, overnight lows in the teens to lower 30s. Clouds increase tomorrow, highs in the upper 40s to upper 50s.
Welcome back to the Granite State News Collaborative's Forum for New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District, hosted by NHPR in partnership with New Hampshire PBS. We're talking with Lily Tang-Williams, the Republican nominee, and Maggie Goodlander, the Democrat in this race. I'm Mara Hoplamazian, a reporter for NHPR. With me is Michaela Towfighi of the Concord Monitor. Michaela, you have the next question.
Ms. Tang-Williams, on your website you write that you would work to repeal, quote, ineffective gun control laws that criminalize law-abiding gun owners. What gun control laws, in your view, need to be repealed? And what steps would you support to keep guns out of the hands of people who may harm themselves or others?
My heart goes to all the victims of gun violence in our country. But whenever something happened, we should look at roots of the problems. It's not the guns. It's like guns is just a tool, just like a car is a tool for you to drive. And set up lots of loopholes and do gun control, make law-abiding citizens go through loops, and that's just un-American. And our Second Amendment right is there to protect, us against tyranny. And we have a constitutional carry in our state, and we have the least amount of gun violence. We have no school mass shootings because people carry guns. I still think that the gun-free zones by the federal government, it costs lives because the resource officer, which is policeman, is not obligated to rush through the school shooting to save your life. That's what the court says. So we cannot rely on one officer to do that. And there are lots of veterans who are working school district, well-trained, and they can conceal carry and protect kids and innocent teachers. I think I'm out of compassion for those innocent victims to say, hey, that's the best way to save their lives. It's by allowing people volunteer and to train and to carry.
So on that note, as you just mentioned, you've called for allowing armed volunteers to patrol schools as a way to prevent mass shootings. What would that look like in practical terms, and how would you respond to parental concerns about more guns in school buildings?
Well, that's misinformation. I have lots of parents tell me they would rather to have law-abiding citizens to conceal carry. Nobody knows if they carry or not. So when criminals think twice, they don't go to shoot up police stations. You know why? Because every police officer is armed. And that guy will be dead before he shoots somebody else. Same thing applies everywhere. Law-abiding citizens conceal carry can save lives, and the parents should trust the law-abiding citizens, instead of criminals, give them unlimited, basically access with some mentally ill issues involved, and go to school to do mass killings.
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams. Ms. Goodlander, you said you'd, quote, go after the gun industry as a way to limit violence from firearms. Gun manufacturing is a significant business in New Hampshire, including the 2nd District. What would going after gun makers look like in terms of congressional legislation? And what do you see the impact being on local gun makers here?
Well, let me just first say, look, I teach constitutional law at UNH Law School here in Concord and at Dartmouth. I believe in our Constitution and I believe in our Second Amendment. I believe that our Second Amendment allows for a wide range of common sense gun safety solutions that will address what is the number one killer of our kids in America, and that is gun violence. The number one killer of our kids in 2024. My opponent has said she wants to put more guns in schools. I think that there are common sense constitutional solutions that will actually address the problem, including by stepping up background checks, by closing loopholes, both the Charleston loophole, which I heard from my colleagues at the Department of Justice, we just simply have not given law enforcement enough time to undertake serious background checks. So that's a loophole we should close. We should also close loopholes that have allowed the gun industry to go unaccountable and to be immune from civil lawsuits that would actually help to impose some measure of accountability for families who have lost their loved ones. This is a change that Congress can make under federal law, but the most important change that I think we should see is actually to continue to build on the bipartisan progress that we saw in the last 3 years. I mentioned the President's Unity Agenda. A core pillar and accomplishment was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which put 14,000 mental health professionals into our public schools. I think we need
Ms. Goodlander.
More resources for mental health, not more guns in our schools.
Thank you. So you've called for what you getting termed weapons of war off the streets. And given the recent failure of Congress to reinstate any kind of assault weapons ban, does that mean you'd support a federal gun buyback as a way to reduce the number of guns in our country?
I think we need to look at the full range of reasonable constitutional solutions. This is, as I said, the number one killer of our kids. I know from my experience in the Navy, and I know just as a reasonable person in this world, that weapons of war have no place in our community centers, in our public schools. They just don't. And so this is something that I will work for. And I think we should look at voluntary gun buyback programs because I think these are reasonable steps that we've seen actually can deliver us results in addressing the number one killer of kids in America today.
Thank you, Ms. Goodlander. Over to you, Mara.
We'll turn to healthcare now. Ms. Goodlander, the U.S. remains the only industrialized country in the world without universal health care. In New Hampshire, the number of residents without insurance has declined since the expansion of Medicaid, but more than 65,000 people were still uninsured in 2023. You've said you'd work in Congress to expand access to affordable health care. How would you do that, and would your approach include a single-payer system?
I believe that every American deserves access to affordable health care. It is core to human rights, I believe, in this country. The Affordable Care Act is a really significant piece of legislation, more than a big deal, a huge deal, one that delivered health care to people all across the state and in our country. When my opponent was a candidate for Congress in Colorado, she said that the Affordable Care Act should be repealed and not replaced. I believe that this Congress should continue to build on the successes of the Affordable Care Act, but the underlying problem, Mara, and what I saw at the Department of Justice is that we have an incredibly consolidated healthcare industry in this country. And I believe deeply, United Healthcare is the 5th largest corporation in the world. It's not just the biggest payer in this country, it owns more provider practices all across the country than ever before. And one thing I'd say, I was up in Berlin a few days ago talking to healthcare providers up there. We need to think fundamentally about how we can make this industry more competitive because it's going to lower costs for hardworking consumers. It's going to make providers more able to provide the care that they're trying to provide. And this all starts with protecting, though, the basic promise of the Affordable Care Act, including for the tens of thousands of Granite Staters with pre-existing conditions.
So would you support single-payer health care as a way forward?
I'm a capitalist. I believe in competition, but I believe that capitalism without competition is not capitalism, which is why I'm focused on bringing back competition into our healthcare industry.
Got it. And I know you've talked about, working for the antitrust division at the Department of Justice a lot during your campaign. How would you bring an antitrust approach to making federal policy on healthcare?
I think we see it whether it's we're looking at big pharma or big healthcare insurers who have the landscape has changed, and federal law has not kept up with market realities. Even the way that we've organized enforcement of our federal laws that are designed to make our healthcare industry more competitive, it's been, in some cases, more than a century since they've been updated. And this is an area, Mara, where I see real possibility for bipartisan progress. When I was in the antitrust division, we had partners all across the ideological spectrum, because I think it is just this is an area that is rooted in deeply American ideas, that no corporation is above the law, and that corporate power, just like political power, should be checked.
Thank you. Ms. Tang-Williams, you've said if elected, you would work to strengthen protections for Social Security and Medicare, but you're also advocating for cuts to federal spending widespread. Would those cuts include Medicaid, which about 15% of New Hampshire's population relies on for health care?
Well, that Social Security and Medicare are the seniors paying through their years of hard work. And I will protect those benefits. But also that our federal government is always addicted to use your trust fund money. There's no lockbox. They use it as a slush fund for their out-of-control spending. And there's some programs being proposed right now for the illegal immigrants, have a quick pathway to citizenship, and they're going to continue to be part of that Social Security trust fund. It will further actually drive that into insolvency. I want to protect that. I also want to reduce inflation, to stimulate economic growth and jobs, so more payroll tax dollars will go to that Social Security Trust Fund. When you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, as I said, it actually cut Medicare by $30 billion to pay for the ideal Green New Deal.
So just back to Medicaid, would your proposal for federal spending cuts include Medicaid?
Well, the Medicaid, and I have to look into that. And if we have justified any spending for our own citizens, I'm always open-minded. But I'm not open-minded when we put our citizens last and sending endless money to get involved, endless wars like your husband is a part of. And I say that my citizens always tell me on my campaign trail, we need the resources here. We need the money here. So I'm very sympathetic. I went to some nonprofit organization. They all tell me their clients were there, their family, children were there. Some were crying and begging for help. I think that those regular people have been forgotten by the party who's supposed to represent
Ms. Tang-Williams,
them.
I want to ask a follow-up question, which is many parts of the country, including across New Hampshire, are seeing a staffing shortage for medical professions. Experts say that shortage will only get worse in the coming years. How could the federal government address this?
You know what? That if we bring down the cost of everything, that will help. And the number two, I'm open actually to our senior citizens. You're relying heavily on your relative care, your home health care to keep in your homes. And maybe there's some federal tax credit, expenses reimbursement, just like for self-employed people, and I'm open to that. But also work visas for the people who are willing to come here, take those jobs we cannot fill at a lot more affordable rate, but we need the Congress together to say, hey, we need to offer work visas for those people come here, take care of our senior citizens. And that has not been done because
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams.
Let's
move on to housing now. Over to you, Michaela.
May I just say just one point on something that was said? I think, look, when it comes to Social Security, this is one of the most important issues.
Is this a response to a direct attack?
It's a response to what was said about how we're going to actually...
We'll give you 30 seconds for
Thank you. I think it is a hugely big difference between the two of us. When my opponent was a candidate for Congress in Colorado, she said that no federal program should exist if it's not specifically mentioned in this United States Constitution. That is a radical idea that would end Social Security as we know it. She has repeated that she would raise the retirement age. She has said Social Security should be privatized. These are deep differences between the two of us. And one thing that I just want to make crystal clear, no one should be shifting around and unclear about what their position is on protecting Social Security. And
Thanks,
I will protect it with
Ms.
everything.
Goodlander. Ms. Tang-Williams, we'll give you 30 seconds to respond, yes.
That was 8 years ago in Colorado. And I don't know where you got that idea. and I want to limit the government powers to manage our money because they have failed. And they got us $35 trillion in debt. But today I'm running as a Republican, and I listen to the people. I put my own opinions aside. Actually, I developed sympathy towards people who have fixed income. So that's a different story now. And I want to protect that. I want to put our people first, precisely because I say that this trust fund is a slush fund for federal government who are addicted to your money to use for other things, for
Thank you,
their
Ms.
pet
Tang-Williams.
projects.
We need to move on now. Let's go on to housing. Michaela?
Okay. Ms. Tang-Williams, I've talked to residents in the area who live in manufactured housing parks expecting to retire in New Hampshire. Instead, investors across the country are purchasing these parks and pricing homeowners out. What can the federal government do to protect these homeowners?
I think that there is a small percentage of the investors are buying up properties in New Hampshire, and I think that the Congress probably should look into investigate that to say that, what, especially when it comes to single-family homes where our residents heavily rely on to purchase to live their American dream. But also, I am a free market capitalism. Why do people want to invest in real estate? Because our dollar is going down. They think real estate is a hedge against inflation. So all the investors want to have return for their money, which is common. You cannot blame them, do you? I mean, our dollar is going down, gold, silver is going up, crypto is going up. Who wants to invest, buy U.S. dollars, treasury now? Even Chinese government is dumping it because they say there's no future. Our super inflation might come if we don't stop this out of control spending. Mm-hmm. But I think we want to address affordable issues. But again, it's an issue caused by the government, and I don't want government coming use print money to offer a bigger government solution because that would just vicious cycles and drive up inflation again.
Thank you.
Doesn't work.
I have a follow-up for you on that. Beyond lowering costs, what other support do you think could be in place for New Hampshire homeowners and renters?
I think we need the local zoning law reforms because I believe in local control, but some towns have very, very restrict zoning laws, and that prevents people from building more affordable housing or multiple units. But that's up to the local board to decide. So if you want to get involved, want to reform the zoning laws, you got to get involved in your local communities and vote as one of the selectmen board members. And then New Hampshire people are very independent-minded. They even don't want the state government tell them what to do. And they'll tell federal government take a hike to tell them what to do. Yeah.
Ms. Goodlander, in August, the Biden administration announced $100 million to help remove barriers to affordable housing development. But communities need to take the initiative to apply for this money. Do you think the federal government should take a more heavy hand in requiring communities to build their way out of the nation's housing crisis?
Well, look, this is such an important issue. I hear about it everywhere I go. The cost for people who want to rent a home, want to buy a home, it's through the roof. I was in the Upper Valley recently talking to a senior on fixed income. In the Upper Valley alone, the cost of home rentals are up 82%. That's the same percentage increase, by the way, that we've seen of single-family homes all across the state. So I really do believe that government is a team sport, and nowhere is that clearer than when it comes to the area of addressing our housing crisis. So I think we've got two big pieces of business here. Number one is we do need to invest in infrastructure, which is going to help us really overcome barriers to increasing supply. We know what our mandate is. We need to build 60,000 new homes in the state of New Hampshire by 2030. So that's going to take real investments in water and in sewage, building on the investments that we saw from the bipartisan infrastructure law signed into law during the Biden-Harris administration. And you know what? There's been a lot of disagreement in this debate, but I couldn't agree more that we've got to find creative ways to help make sure that local zoning laws are pointing in the right direction towards affordability and accessibility.
Thank you. And many in the construction industry say they'd like to build more, but high costs of materials make it difficult. Is there a role for Congress in lowering these costs?
One of the things I looked at closely when I was at the Justice Department was our supply chains and why we are seeing high costs of building materials. So the shipping industry is an industry in our economy that for a long time went unchecked. And for the first time in decades, we brought about shipping reform that I believe is going to continue to have an impact on the affordability of basic materials. But what I would say to this, too, is we really do have a role to play in investing in the infrastructure that's going to be needed to build up housing supply. 60,000 homes by 2030. Most of these homes are going to need to be homes that people are purchasing. So
Thank you.
We have a big task ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tang-Williams, as you campaign, you've often said you'd rather stay in New Hampshire than go to Washington, which you've called the swamp. But the swamp clearly holds some appeal for you. This is your third run for Congress after an unsuccessful campaign for the same seat 2 years ago and a run as a Libertarian for the Senate in Colorado in 2016. Why are you so eager to get to a place that you say you disdain?
Because my slogan is that I fear the country I love is becoming the country I left. That's how I got involved as an American citizen by choice over 10 years ago to become a politically an activist in Colorado. I fought against Obama's Common Core, federalized education, centralized data cleaning, testing, and standards. And I fought against gun control when they passed along the party line to ban our magazines for AR-15s. And as long as this country is going down the wrong path, I do not feel like this is the country I came here for, which is, yes, free country, and all citizens are created equal, have equal protection under the laws. And now we have censorship. And ask your former boss a few months ago, Biden, how many people he censored his DOJ, including former Democrats like Towfighi and RFK, and take off people the ballot to compete with him to run in the primary. There are lots of issues I'm worried about for our country. I love living where New Hampshire, but I have to go to Washington, D.C. to reduce the power, size, intrusiveness of the U.S. government in order to live in a free country.
Ms. Tang-Williams, if you're elected to Congress, can you identify the committees you'd most like to sit on and how they would best position you to serve residents of your district?
I'm a financial conservative. I think our national debt, our out-of-control spending is really a major issue to prevent our kids to have a shot at the American dream. So I would volunteer if I get the opportunity to serve on all financial services committees. And of course, I will be the only one who probably grow up and survive Mao's Cultural Revolution to go to serve in the Congress. I would like to also serve on Foreign Affairs Committee to help our federal government deal with Communist China and protect the American jobs and stop their infiltration and use our tax credit to come here to build factories in Michigan, in California, and dominate the solar panels and drones and all those EV industries.
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams.
So I can be very helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Goodlander, you're from Nashua, but you've chosen to spend pretty much all of your adult life outside of your district, mostly in D.C. You've described your time working in Washington as excellent preparation for Congress, but what do you say to voters who remain skeptical of someone with deep ties to national politics who returned to Nashua less than a year ago to launch this campaign?
No, I am a proud fourth-generation Nashua girl. New Hampshire made me who I am today. This is where I learned the most important things in life at Birch Hill Elementary School. It's where I've come back to teach the next generation constitutional law. This state made me who I am today, and every time I've taken the oath to serve our country, it's been to serve New Hampshire too, whether it was in the Navy, at the Justice Department, or at the White House. And I'm in this race because I believe this is the most important election in our lifetimes. I believe we have so much work to do to make life. Hardworking people across the state are feeling a lot of pain right now, and being a candidate for Congress has been an experience of listening to people who are feeling pain. They are worried that Social Security and Medicare are on the chopping block. They are worried that our democracy could cease to exist if we don't see the peaceful transfer of power in this country. They are worried because their reproductive freedom has been ripped away from them. We have so much work to do. And I would say to this, this is a job. It's a job interview for a really hard job in an unprecedented moment. I wouldn't be in this race if I weren't confident that I could deliver for this district right out of the gate.
Thank you, Ms. Goodlander. You've been renting an apartment in Nashua for this campaign, but you also own a home in Portsmouth in the state's other congressional district. If elected, do you plan to move to the 2nd District permanently, or do you expect to commute there from the Seacoast?
From my living room in Nashua today, I can see the hospital where I was born, after my mom voted, of course, and I can also see the shoe factory where my great-grandfather worked. This is the district. I became a lawyer here in Concord. I've taught constitutional law here. So much of my adult life has been about this district, and New Hampshire is where my husband and I want to raise our kids. And of course, I would be in the 2nd District to do just that. This is the district who made me who I am. It's literally where I was born and raised, and it's where I've spent so much of my adult life doing the things that matter most to me, including teaching the next generation constitutional law.
So you'd plan to move to the 2nd
Yes.
District? Got it.
And this is where I live. Like I said, from my living room today, I can see so many important sites.
Thank you.
From my family's 4 generations in the state.
Got it. Michaela, over to you.
Ms. Tang-Williams, the peaceful transfer of power is a fundamental American value. January 6, 2021 was a day that put that value at grave risk. How do you view the events of January 6th? And if voters elect you, how would you approach executing Congress's duty to certify the results of the 2024 presidential election?
Well, January 6th was a riot. Unfortunately, happened. I was looking forward to the debates when they were trying to have the hearings about that, and then it was quickly certified and went through, and the court never take up the cases, and so I think that the people were upset, and there were some irregularities, mail-in ballots after COVID, and also that the censorship. From Biden's DOJ to force big tech, even the Facebook CEO come out to say he was forced to censor COVID-19 information, and the laptop story of Hunter Biden involved his father's corruption. Censorship belies people to know the truth. So people cannot make a well-informed decision. Are we going to have more censorship for this election? I don't know. And I know that they're constantly suing Elon Musk and want to shut him down because he have a free speech app. And lots of medias are there. NHPR is on there. So I enjoy to follow everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Tang-Williams.
We deserve to know the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Goodlander, you often talk about the events of January 6th as you campaign. You also talk about Congress's responsibility to provide oversight. Under what circumstances, if any, do you believe Congress would be right to block the certification of an election?
Look, we just heard something very important for everyone to hear. We just heard an unwillingness to accept the results of the 2020 election, which President Biden won fair and square. And there is nothing more dangerous to our country or our Constitution. There's nothing more at odds with it than an unwillingness to accept the results of a democratic election when it doesn't go your way. No one who is unwilling to accept the results of the 2020 election has any business running for Congress anywhere in this country. It is unacceptable. It is a threat to our country and our Constitution. The role that Congress plays, and I'm very happy that the United States Congress came together to make changes to the Electoral Count Act, because I believe that here in New Hampshire, we can trust in our elections. Our local election officials are on the front lines of our democracy. They deserve our respect and our support, and I want to support them wholeheartedly. So what I can promise you is I will absolutely certify the legitimate results of this election, just as I will recognize the legitimate results of the 2020 election.
Thank you.
I got a 30-second response.
Sorry, Ms. Tang-Williams.
You put the words in my mouth. I did not say I will not accept Biden is our president today. And I just said the people were upset. They had the questions. Do you
Ms.
want
Tang-Williams,
people's
we're going to have
voice
to move
be
on.
heard
We're
or not?
nearing the end of the debate.
You cannot repeat your party mainstream media is talking.
Thank you, Ms.
voice.
Tang-Williams.
Thank you to both of you. Believe it or not, with that, we're at the end of today's debate. I want to thank our two candidates, Maggie Goodlander and Lily Tang-Williams, for taking the time to be here today. Also, thanks to New Hampshire PBS for partnering with us, and thanks to the journalists from the Granite State News Collaborative, including the Concord Monitor, the Laconia Daily Sun, and the Manchester Ink Link, who helped produce these forums. This is the last of our candidate forums this year. You can find all of our election coverage at nhpr.org. And remember, Election Day is November 5th. I'm Mara Hoplamazian, along with Michaela Towfighi. Thanks for joining us today on NHPR.
Stay tuned for Here and Now. It's next on NHPR.
The day's top headlines, local stories from your community, music performed live from Studio D. Head to nhpr.org to get up to date on the latest news and discover a little something extra while you're at it. That's at nhpr.org.
Hi, it's Ari Shapiro. On All Things Considered from NPR, we hit pause on the news cycle for you so you can get a handle on what you need to know and why it matters.
Offering online and low residency masters, doctoral degree